The Warsaw Death. A week later, it was suggested to Andrei Yevmofich that he should have a rest, that is, send in his resignation, a suggestion he received with indifference. And a week later still, Mihail Averyanich and he were staying in a position carriage driving to the nearest railway station. The days were cool and bright, with a blue sky and a transparent distance. They were 2 days driving to the 150 miles to the railway station and stayed 2 nights on the way. When at the posting station, the glasses given them for their tea hadn't been properly washed, or the drivers were slow in harnessing the horses. Mihail Averyanich will turn crimson, and quivering all over shouted, "Hold your tongue, don't argue." And in the carriage he talked without ceasing for a moment, describing his campaigns in the Caucasus and in Poland. What adventures he had had, what meetings! He talked loudly and opened his eyes so wide with wonder that he might well be thought to be lying. Moreover, as he talked, he breathed in Andrei Yemefich's face and laughed into his ear. This bothered the doctor and prevented him from thinking or concentrating his mind. In the train, they traveled, from motives of economy, third class, and in a non-smoking compartment. Half of the passengers were decent people. Mihail Averyanich soon made friends with everyone, and moving from one seat to another, kept saying loudly that they ought not to travel by these appealing lines. It was a regular swindle, a very different thing riding on a good horse. One could do over 70 miles a day and feel fresh and well after it, and our bad harvests were due to the training of the pink marshes. Altogether, the way things were done was dreadful. He got excited, talked loudly, and wouldn't let others speak. This endless chatter, to the accompaniment of loud laughter and expressive gestures, worried Andrei Yemofich. Which of us is the madman, he thought with vexation. I, who try not to disturb my fellow passengers in any way, or this egoist who thinks that he is cleverer and more interesting than anyone here, and so will leave no one in peace. In Moscow, Mikhail Averyanich put on a military coat without epaulets and trousers with red braid on them. He wore a military cap and overcoat in the street, and soldiers saluted him. It seemed to Andrei Yemofich now that his companion was a man who had flung away all that was good and kept only what was bad of all the characteristics of a country gentleman that he had once possessed. He liked to be waited on even when it was quite unnecessary. The matches would be lying before him on the table, and he would see them and shouted to the waiter to give him the matches. He didn't hesitate to appear before a maidservant in nothing but his underclothes. He used the familiar mode of address to all footmen indiscriminately, even old men. When he was angry, called them fools and blockheads. This, Andrei Yemofich thought, was like a gentleman, but disgusting. First of all, Mikhail Averyanich led his friend to Iversky Madonna. He prayed fervently, shedding tears and bowing down to the earth, and when he had finished, heaved a deep sigh and said, "Even though the ones don't believe, it makes one somehow easier when one prays a little. Kiss the icon, my dear fellow." Andrei Yemofich was embarrassed and he kissed the image, while Mikhail Averyanich pursed up his lips and prayed in a whisper, and again tears came into his eyes. Then they went to the Kremlin and looked there the Tesser Cannon and the Tsar well, and even touched them with their fingers, admired the view of the river, visited St. Severus and the Rumyanstev Museum. They dined at Teastov's. Mikhail Averyanich looked a long time at the menu, stroking his whiskers, and said in a tone of a gourmand accustomed to dine in restaurants, "We shall see what you give us to eat today, angel." The doctor walked about, looked at things, ate and drank, but he had all the while one feeling, annoyance with Mikhail Averyanich. He longed to have a rest from his friends, to get away from him, to hide himself, while the friend thought it was his duty not to let the doctor move away a step from him, and to provide him with as many distractions as possible. When there was nothing to look at, he entertained him with conversation. For 2 days, Andrei Yemovich endured it. But on the third, he announced to his friend that he was ill and wanted to stay home for the whole day. His friend replied that in that case he would stay too, that he really needed rest, for he was run off his legs already. Andrei Yemovich lay on the sofa with his face to the back and clenching his teeth, listening to his friend, who assured him with heat that sooner or later France would certainly trash Germany, that there were a great many scoundrels in Moscow. It was impossible to judge of horse's quality by its outward appearance. The doctor began to have a buzzing in his ears and palpitations of the heart, but out of delicacy couldn't bring himself to beg his friend to go away or hold his tongue. Fortunately, Mikhail Averyanich grew weary of sitting in the hotel room, and after dinner he went out for a walk. As soon as he was alone, Andrei Yemovich abandoned himself to a feeling of relief. How pleasant to lie motionless on the sofa and to know that one is alone in the room. Real happiness is impossible without solitude. The fallen angel betrayed God probably because he longed for solitude, of which the angels know nothing. Andrei Yemovich wanted to think about what he had seen and heard during the last few days, but he couldn't get Mikhail Averyanich out of his head. Why, he has taken a holiday and come with me out of friendship, out of generosity, thought the doctor with vexation. Nothing could be worse than this friendly supervision. I suppose he is good-natured and generous and a lively fellow, but he is a bore, an insufferable bore. In the same way, there are people who never say anything but what is clever and good, yet one feels that they are dull-witted people. For the following days, Andrei Yemovich declared himself ill and wouldn't leave the hotel room. He couldn't succeed in attuning his thoughts to a serious and lofty level. This is what I get from the real life Ivan Dmitrich talked about, he thought, angry at his own pettiness. It is no consequence, though. I shall go home, and everything will go on as before. It was the same thing in Petersburg too. For whole days together he didn't leave the hotel room, but lay on the sofa and only got up to drink beer. Mikhail Averyanich was all haste to get to Warsaw. My dear man, what should I go there for? Said Andrei Yemovich in an imploring voice. You go alone and let me go home, I entreat you. On no account, protested Mikhail Averyanich. It's a marvelous town. Andrei Yemovich hadn't the strength of will to insist on his own way, and much against his inclination went to Warsaw. There he didn't leave the hotel room, but lay on the sofa furious with himself, with his friend, and with the waiters, who obstinately refused to understand Russian. While Mikhail Averyanich, healthy, hearty, and full of spirits as usual, went about the town from morning to night, looking for his old acquaintances. Several times he didn't return at home. After one night spent in some unknown haunt, he returned home early in the morning, in a violently excited condition, with a red face and tousled hair. For a long time he walked up and down to the rooms, muttering something to himself, then stopped and said, "Honor before everything." After walking up and down for a little longer, he clutched his head in both hands and pronounced in a tragic voice, "Yes, honor, before everything, accursed be the moment when the idea first entered my head to visit this Babylon. My dear friend," he added, addressing the doctor, "you may despise me. I have played and lost. Lend me 500 rubles." Andrei Yemovich counted out of 100 rubles and gave them to his friend without a word. The latter, still crimson with shame and anger, incoherently articulated some useless vow, put on his cap, and went out. Returning 2 hours later, he flopped into an easy chair, heaved a loud sigh, and said, "My honor is saved. Let us go, my friend. I do not care to remain another hour in this accursed town. Scoundrels, Austrian spies, By the time the friends were back in their own town, that it was November, and deep snow was laying in the streets. Dr. Habatov had Andrei Yemofe's post. He was still living in his old lodgings, waiting for Andrei Yemofich to arrive and clear out of the hospital apartments. The plain woman, whom he called his cook, was already established in one of the lodges. Fresh scandals out about the hospital were going to the round of town. It was said that the plain woman had quarreled with the superintendent, and that the latter had crawled on his knees before her begging forgiveness. On the very first day he arrived, Andrei Yemofich had to look out for lodgings. My friend, the postmaster, said to him timidly, "Excuse an indiscreet question. What means have you at your disposal?" Andrei Yemofich, without a word, counted out his money and said, 86 rubles. "I don't mean that," Mihail Averyanich brought out in confusion, misunderstanding him. "I mean, what have you lived to own?" "I tell you, 86 rubles, I have nothing else." Mihail Averyanich looked upon the doctor as an honorable man, yet he suspected that he had accumulated a fortune of at least 20,000. Now learning that Andrei Yemofich was a beggar, that he had nothing to live on, he was for some reason suddenly moved to tears and embraced his friend. Andrei Yemofich now lodged in a little house with 3 windows. There were only 3 rooms beside the kitchen in the little house. The doctor lived in 2 of them, which looked in the street, while Daryushka and the landlady with her 3 children lived in the 3rd room and the kitchen. Sometimes the landlady's lover, a drunken peasant who was rowdy and reduced the children and Daryushka to a terror, would come for the night. When he arrived and established himself in the kitchen and demanded vodka, they all felt very uncomfortable, and the doctor would be moved by pity to take the crying children into his room and let them lie on his floor. And this gave him a great satisfaction. He got up as before at 8 o'clock, and after his morning tea sat down to read his old books and magazines. He had no money for new ones, either because the books were old or perhaps because of the change in his surroundings. Reading exhausted him and didn't grip his attention as before. That he might not spend his time in idleness, he made a detailed catalogue of his book and gummed little labels on their backs. And his mechanical, tedious work seemed to him more interesting than reading. The monotonous, tedious work lulled his thoughts to sleep in some uncountable way. And the time passed quickly while he thought of nothing. Even sitting in the kitchen, peeling potatoes with Daryushka or picking over the buckwheat grain seemed to him interesting. On Saturdays and Sundays he went to church, standing near the wall and half closing his eyes. He listened to the singing and thought of his father, of his mother, of the university, of the religions of the world. He felt calm and melancholy, and as he went out of the church afterwards, he regretted that the service was so soon over. He went twice to the hospital to talk Ivan Dmitrich, but on both occasions Ivan Dmitrich was unusually excited and ill-humored. He bade the doctor leave him in peace, as he had long been sick of empty chatter, and declared, to make up for all his sufferings, he asked from the damned scoundrels only one favor: solitary confinement. Surely they wouldn't refuse him even that? On both occasions, when Andrei Yemofich was taking leave of him and wishing him good night, he answered rudely and said, "Go to hell." And Andrei Yemofich didn't know now whether to go him for the 3rd time or not. He longed to go. In old days, Andrei Yemofich used to talk about his rooms and think in the interval after dinner, but now from dinner time till evening tea he lay on the sofa with his face to the back. He gave himself up to the trivial thoughts which he couldn't struggle against. He was mortified that after more than 20 years of service he had been given neither a pension nor any assistance. It is true that he hadn't done his work honestly, but then all who are in the service get a pension without distinction, whether they are honest or not. Contemporary justice lies precisely in the bestowal of grades, orders, and pensions, not for the moral qualities or capacities, For Cyrus, whatever it may have been like, why he was alone to be an exception, he had no money at all. He was ashamed to pass by the shop and look at the woman who owned it. He owed 32 rubles for beer already. There was money owing to the landlady also. Darishko sold old clothes and books on the sly and told lies to the landlady, saying that the doctor was just going to receive a large sum of money. He was angry with himself for having wasted on traveling the 1,000 rubles he had saved up. How useful that 1,000 rubles would have been now. He was vexed that people wouldn't leave him in peace. Havatov thought it his duty to look one in his sick revolting to Andrei Yemifich. His well-fed face and vulgar, condescending tone, and his use of the word colleague, and his high-top boots. The most revolting thing was, he thought, his duty to treat Andrei Yemifich, and thought that he really was treating him. On every visit he brought a bottle of bromide and rhubarb pills, and Mihail Averyanich too thought it his duty to visit his friend and entertain him. Every time he went into Andrei Yemifich with an affectation of ease, laughed constituently, and began assuring him that he was looking very well today. He hadn't yet repaired his Warsaw debt, and was overwhelmed by shame. He was constrained, and so tried to laugh louder and talk more amusingly. His anecdotes and descriptions seemed endless now, and were an agony both to Andrei Yemifich and himself. In his presence, Andrei Yemifich usually lay on the sofa with his face to the wall, and listened with his teeth clenched. His soul was oppressed with rankling disgust, and after every visit from his friends, he felt as though this disgust had risen higher and was mounting into his throat. To stifle petty thoughts, he made haste to reflect that he himself and Habatov and Mikhail Averyanich would all sooner or later perish without leaving any trace on the world. Everything, culture and the moral law, will pass away, and not even a burdock would grow out of them. Of what consequence was shame in the presence of a shopkeeper? Of what consequence was the insignificant Habatov or the wearisome friendship of Mikhail Averyanich? It was all trivial and nonsensical, but such reflections didn't help him now. Scarcely he had imagined the earthly globe in a million years when Habatov in his high-top boots or Mikhail Averyanich with his forced laugh would appear from behind a bare rock, and he even heard the shamefaced whisper, "The Warsaw debt, I will repay it in a day or two, my dear fellow, without fail."